Hello, business innovators and educators. You're listening to The Enterprise Learning Architect. I'm your host, Chris Knotts, here to guide you through practices and ideas you can use to help build a culture of learning in your organization. Stay tuned to power up your professional playbook as we have conversations with exceptional people who share their experience in achieving successful learning outcomes. Ready to innovate, educate, and iterate? Let's do it. Welcome to today's episode of the Enterprise Learning Pod. This week, Toby and I unpack a few of the relationships between learning and training and lean product testing. We discuss some of the product development practices we've used over the years to test new training topics, and we also chat about how training products can serve as an excellent vehicle for testing other types of products, especially software and technology services. You'll get a sense for some of my guiding principles when it comes to product testing and a few hits on product development principles in general. Not all products are created equal, and I mean that quite literally. If you're curious about how you can develop and test new training products without spending a lot of money, or how you can use the unique qualities of a learning product to gauge the market on a related technology service, then this is the conversation for you.
Hello, and welcome back to the Enterprise Learning Pod. Today you are joined by me, Toby Mize, the usual producer of the show. It's a bit weird pulling back the veil. Normally I just sit in on these silently, but I've come in to help Chris give his 2 cents on some of the really important aspects of this business. Chris, how you doing today?
Yes, I'm well. Thanks, Toby, and welcome, my dear Gen Z young man. I'm going to try to exploit those generational insights from you so I can truly become a disruptive force in the enterprise learning space.
Mm. Well, cracking the Gen Z market is all about producing as much slop as you can digitally. So glad that I'm
And
here
that's
to
what we're
help
doing.
turn
Yeah,
it out.
you're here to you're here to talk with me with utterly no prompting or coaching whatsoever. You're just gonna pull things out of your hat, and who
Aw.
knows what we'll talk about.
I was thinking pulling them out of a slightly different place, but I'll get started in the hat. Uh,
I think the rating of this podcast is clean. So just a reminder.
I thought you were about to say the rating is dropping star moment by moment, but I see now you mean for the audience.
In
All
real
right,
time.
y'all.
Maybe we should try an explicit version of the Enterprise Learning Pod. I don't know.
I'm rated R. Okay. Today we are going to start off by talking about how designing training and learning products, how they are an excellent way to do market testing on new products of all kinds. And so, if we just kind of want to jump in, so you can kind of tell us what that means, and we'll get started.
Yeah, sounds good. So that man for a random pulling out of your hat question, that's really well articulated. Nice job. So this is a topic that's really dear to my heart. So it's what I wanted to talk about today, and so I'll just kind of try to set the table with a few different ideas here. So um, the first one is that we're talking today about product testing on the one hand, but we're talking about training products on the other hand. So there's a few different dimensions here that I kind of wanted to clarify. So the first one is this idea of, let's say you are in a commercial training company or a commercial training market and you're selling training. Training's your product, right? So you always want to be innovating and finding and probing the market for the next thing that's going to make you money when you're a training provider. Training gets commoditized and price points go down, and it kind of turns into a race to the bottom at some point once every single training company in the world is offering the same thing. And and those products age as well. I mean, there's only so many people who can achieve a certain certification or take a certain training class. You're going to have repeat customers for your training business, but you're not usually going to have any repeat customers for the same class, right? Somebody's taken a class, they've taken it, they're done. So therefore, it's really important to always be backfilling your training catalog with new stuff, and that's been a specialty of mine. It's been like 10 years of my career has basically been standing up and testing new training products and looking for the ones that are good market fit, the ones that are going to drive new revenue. Basically, this is going to sound cheesy, but I've made my employers many millions of dollars doing this across the new product portfolios. Of course, I failed a lot of times too, and that's something that we'll talk about a little bit. So that's the first thing, right? Is what if training is your product, and how do you go to market with new products and test those products if you're trying to sell a new training product? But then there's a second thing, and the second thing is kind of cool. And so I wanted to highlight this. And the second thing is that if you think about the first thing, which is testing training products, uh, there are some interesting qualities about training products which make them useful just to do other kinds of market testing. So therefore, the title or whatever the description is for this episode, we're talking about using training as a way to test the market for other products as well. Now you can't do every single kind of product in the world like this, but some you can. In particular, technology products, software, things like that. There's sort of a synergy between training products and those types of products, and testing the market with training can be an interesting and useful way to test those products as well. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll stop there for a moment and see if you have anything you want to poke at.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned the kind of race to the bottom mentality, and I think in this age of digitization and particularly globalization, we're kind of seeing that race to the bottom as a trend across all sectors. You see it in the success of platforms like AliExpress and Temu, which is, Amazon is now. Amazon was the original, right? We're cutting out the mom and pop shops. We're going rock bottom prices until somebody can undercut us with even rockier, bottomier prices, and a lot of times without any sort of clear path towards financial profitability. We see this with Uber pricing out the taxi market. How do you see uh, a market so saturated and now so globally available in the case of training products and the other modalities that you do? How do you avoid that race to the bottom? How do you avoid the people who are undercutting you for a worse product, and how do you repair the damage that's being done?
Yeah, well said. So it's a really important point, right? So it's all about commoditization, and commoditization happens in all markets, all mature markets at least. And if you think about things that are true global commodities, grain, oil, coffee, stuff like that, there's no longer really any like product based competition. I mean, there may be different grades of oil or something like that that are at different price points, but those markets are completely commoditized. At the end of the day, people don't really care where they get their Brent crude from. And all of the oil that gets produced all across the world, it just kind of gets put together into a big pool and then sold off across the globe in a big pool. Like it's all just one commoditized market. That's the definition of a commodity, right? Like a commodity is a product that has basically become mature enough and that has become uniform enough that there's not really any room left to differentiate on price because of particular qualities of the product or particular brand or something like that. And that's a completely different kind of market, right? So I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole around commoditization, but in the training market, the thing to understand is that that happens there too. So when training trends come up, um, they follow a product life cycle just like any product does. And if you think about a typical product life cycle, you usually have something that's innovative and new. It comes to market, it begins to get consumed by the early adopters. And then there's sort of this adoption life cycle that happens, and some training products continue to take off, and some may fizzle, and then everything in between. But for the ones that take off and kind of become like industry standards, now in our space, a good example of this would be something like the PMP or the Project Management Professional Certification from PMI. Another example would be the CSM or the Certified Scrum Master credential that you can earn in a 2-day class. For whatever reason, and we can debate those reasons another time, but the thing that matters is that at least in the US, those certifications and those trainings have become like industry standard trainings that sometimes are just the cost of entry, right? Like you're probably not going to be able to embark upon a career as a project manager if you don't have a PMP or some kind of equivalent credential. So because they become so in demand with certifications, and I mentioned certifications because there's relationships between certifications, and these professional certifications are always somebody's product, right? Like it's not exactly the same as a going to med school and getting board certified as a doctor or something like that. I mean, from one perspective, that's also somebody's product, but that's a little different. But something that's created by a private industry body like PMI or the Scrum Alliance, those certifications are basically somebody's product. And there's always adjacent training that goes along with those. And usually the certifications carry some mix of requirements in order to get the certification. And sometimes that's just training. Sometimes it's a blend of training and experience. Sometimes there's other prerequisites. You have to show profiles of projects that you've done or something like that. It's all over the map. But those two examples of certification products and the training that goes along with them would be examples of fairly commoditized training. So basically, because the training is it sees such broad demand, because basically you have a whole entire industry that has to have that credential. Then there's a lot of demand for it. There's a big universe size of customers who want to pursue that certification and therefore buy the training that goes along with it. And so therefore the market's so big that you have a lot of providers, right? Well, as soon as you have a lot of providers, you have a lot of competition. And competition is the driving force that puts downward pressure on the price point. And so basically the price goes lower and lower, the margins get lower and lower. Everybody's carving away wherever they can in order to offer the best price, because the subject matter is essentially the same, right? Like the subject matter for the PMP or the CSM, it might vary from provider to provider, but because it's mapped to like an exam that you have to take or a particular type of certification, there's only so much room for variance or for quality. Like you've got to have a certain level of quality and you've got to have that subject matter. So one of the only places to try to compete becomes on price. And so that's what I mean by the race to the bottom, right? Now, how do you remedy that? That's your question. So you cannot remedy it in the guise of that particular product itself, right? Just like you can't remedy that with a global commodity like oil or coffee or something like that. I mean, interestingly, I guess as an aside, Starbucks was a big innovator in that space because coffee was a global commodity. They innovated on brand, and then they were able to charge, $3 for a cup of coffee that for years and years had only cost 85 cents, and they did that completely through brand power. But in the training market, it's a little different. Like you're not going to be Starbucks if you're a
Can't
trainer.
Haagen-Dazs your
Exactly.
certification course.
Exactly. So the answer to your main question is you remedy it with your product mix. So if you think about, let's say you have a big conglomerate company like Procter and Gamble, say, or somebody like that, right? Well, Procter and Gamble has lots of different brands. They have lots of different products. So if one of the things that Procter and Gamble sells is something like toothpaste, you can only command a certain premium on price point for toothpaste. Like it's pretty commoditized, right? But their Procter and Gamble is not going to be probably making the majority of their profit off toothpaste. They're going to be maybe making like, I mean, I don't know what they make, but like maybe they make 5 to 10% margin on toothpaste. Well, that's not really a great margin. Another example would be something like groceries. Like groceries is notoriously low margin. Like grocery stores, lots of overhead, lots of inventory, lots of cost, lots of opex, and they do all that work for like 2-3% profit margin. So the same thing happens in training when you get these broadly adopted commoditized products and certifications. So the way that you have to do this is to innovate and bring new products to market, just like Procter and Gamble might bring something new to market, or they might reinvent something old and kind of turn it into something new. Think like Old Spice, right? Like Old Spice was kind of like your granddad's aftershave for decades. And then they came along in like whatever it was in the late 90s or early aughts or something like that. They did this big reinvention of the brand and kind of made it cool, connected with a whole new population, and completely reinvented the image. But again, that's like the Haagen Dazs thing. You're not going to do that in training, so you can only do it with new products. That's the bottom line, right? You have to figure out new products, things that not many people offer, things where the subject matter expertise is rare. It's hard to find people who are knowledgeable, people who can do skills transfer. And a lot of that in the training space is often around emergent stuff, especially emergent technology, because technology is the stuff that's always emerging, right? So, you've got one day, you wake up and cloud computing is a thing. One day you wake up and AI is a thing. Stuff like that. So as soon as there's a fundamentally disruptive technology that emerges, all of a sudden there's an open window there in that moment to associate training products with those technologies. You've got, cloud computing, big new disruptor. Amazon comes along and spins up AWS. So now there's a big platform there, but people have to know how to use the platform. So all of a sudden, there's a new training segment there that can be attacked. And you want to be first or early to market with those things because there's a real first mover advantage, obviously, right? Like it's hard to build training around the new stuff. It's high tech. There's a high skills barrier. There's not a lot of subject matter experts out there, and those are all the ingredients that you want, for something that's innovative. And you can command a much higher price point there because there's less competition, there's just less supply, supply and demand dynamics. So you've got to figure out ways to predictably and kind of in a disciplined fashion always be finding the new products that you can add to your product mix so that you have higher margin products to offset the low margins by the commoditized stuff.
It's nice to start the race to the bottom.
That's exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, it's always going to end up at the bottom. Heat death, heat death.
And the examples that you were given before, like grocery stores, these are businesses. Restaurants is another example that have very very low margin on their main ticket items, but they make up for that with higher margin items like alcohol sales. So you're kind of saying that being that first mover advantage, doing that emergent tech teaching and training, like that's your ability where you can kind of throw higher margins at it and make up for your workhorses who aren't really giving you much return for your investment.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's good to have a good knowledge of product life cycles, even outside of training and learning products, because that product understanding and the way you manage those products applies, just as it would apply to any product. You have a certain adoption curve, as I mentioned. You've got a life cycle there, and it's important to kind of understand where is your product in that life cycle. Is it in the emergent ramp up phase, the early adopter phase? But more importantly, like it can be very hard to tell, as you can imagine, with a new training product, something emergent, whether or not it's going to be a winner or not. And you can burn a lot of money trying to test and find products that are going to be winners. And so it's important to have methods to do that without burning your whole bankroll, so that you can get market signals and identify, oh, I need to invest more in this. I need to get this more broadly adopted.
Yeah. On that note, um, for those individuals tuning in who are familiar with market testing more traditional commoditized products, what's the difference in testing those training products versus the usual commoditized ones?
Yeah, so a key question, right? So, and that kind of gets to the first thing that we kicked off the discussion with. Some of those somewhat unique, or maybe not completely unique, but special qualities that training products have. And so I'll just go through those a little bit, and then we can talk about what the differences would be in testing those products. The first difference is that you can test a training product much cheaper than you can some of those other products that you were talking about. Training is basically content. Training is based on knowledge and skills and things like that, stuff that can be taught. That stuff is a little more abstract than a product that's based on physical material that requires stuff, right? Like, so if you imagine a product that requires stuff, that stuff requires inputs, raw materials, manufacturing, things like that. So the costs are very high just to even get something to market. And you can't get to market without investing in some of that stuff. And so, you know, companies try to be as lean and as efficient about this as they can, but even at a very efficient level, there's still kind of a minimum threshold of investment that you have to make, and that those investments still going to represent a pretty big chunk of change. So what do? They try to mitigate their risk. They don't want to throw a bunch of investment out there if a product's going to be a flop. So they do early activities like market studies and segment sizing and focus groups and research and things like that. They might do some early market testing and things like that. But if you think about doing that type of stuff, um, that even that stuff is kind of costly, right? Like you're not going to do that on the cheap. Just doing a market study and doing some pilot testing and doing some focus groups, and I mean that's a fair bit of work, and so it's going to cost to do that work. Now the difference between something like that and with a versus a training product is that if you can establish a relationship with a subject matter expert who has the skills that you think are maybe going to be the next big thing in the training market, then as long as you have access to that subject matter expert, you may have to pay that subject matter expert for the work that's required. But you don't really have to get the subject matter expert to really do a ton of work, at least not for an in-person, like instructor-led training product, where it's still fundamentally a group of people getting together in a training room or a classroom, or bringing the subject matter expert to your company headquarters and putting your team through the training or something like that. There's some costs associated with those things, but and this is the key point, you don't have to make all those investments to test the product. All you really have to do is effectively advertise and do a little bit of promotion around that product to see if it gets traction, see if there's any response, and see if it seems like something that people are going to want, right? So, like as an example, um, early in my training product, new product development chapter, one of the earliest things that we wanted to test was training on Microsoft Power BI. So, like at that time, Power BI was a new product. Microsoft, obviously, a very established company. And there's some interesting things about that because you already had half the world was already using Microsoft environments, for their technology systems. So Power BI came along and it was introduced at a time when there was also a real ramp up in appetite for analytics and for data analysis and being able to make data driven decisions and things like that. So you got a world that's already half of everybody is already using Microsoft. Microsoft introduces Power BI, boom, like there's a huge market there and there's huge uptick in adoption. It also didn't hurt that Power BI was a great product that analysts love, easy to use, integrated with all of your data ecosystem. It was a really good product. And so people who were experts at doing data analysis liked the product. They liked Power BI. There were people out there who could teach it. And all of a sudden you had a skills demand there. There was a hunger in the market for it. Well, all that we really had to do was engage with a subject matter expert who was really good at Power BI, get them to draft like a 2 to 3 page description and an outline of what that course would be, what you would learn in the course, and who would benefit from it and things like that. Publish that to our website and then do a little bit of lightweight marketing around it. Unlike the traditional product, you don't actually have to build the thing, and that's one of the main reasons why training is kind of a nifty testing vehicle, is because as long as you have the concept well developed, that's all you really need to promote. And then you can, as long as you enforce adequate lead times, so that you don't make the mistake, as I did long ago, of publishing the product and not communicating with my sales team that it actually wasn't created. So they, next thing you know, you have orders for it and they wanted the class delivered the next week, which was impossible. So that was a tough conversation. I learned that one the hard way. But of course, over time, I got really nice processes in place across my other teams so that sales understood and it was flagged in our systems. This is a test product. It's okay to sell it, but you just have to make sure you communicate to your customer. There's an 8-week lead time here. And then that gives your subject matter expert time enough to actually build and deliver the product. So it's kind of nice because if the test succeeds, then building the product pays for itself. You've already got revenue on the line, with a paying customer who's interested, and so to a certainty that it's worth investing in actually building the product. That's different from traditional products in which you have to manufacture the thing before you have something to sell.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have seen many a lead time on test products or minimum order numbers from factories, and you get the product back and it's just not even remotely what you wanted quality wise or anything like that. That can be very difficult to navigate with a limited runway budget. So it's nice to hear that
Yeah.
training products kind of offer a easier bang for the buck solution to quickly get money making opportunities tested and out there.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say, but be careful to highlight, right? Like the snag that you mentioned. I mean, training products are not exempt from that piece of the product life cycle, right? Like it's things still, those first deliveries, they're in beta. You've got a lot to learn about how to improve and scale your product very quickly, just as you would with any product. And that's but that that's important to be part of your product management practice. You basically need that minimum viable product that's going to be good enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, but a lot of the reason you're doing this testing as well, and I'm probably getting ahead of you on some of those questions that I didn't give you to ask, but the product testing phase is fundamentally a learning phase, right? Like you really don't know exactly what your customer wants or needs. Sometimes a customer doesn't even know what they need. They might know what they want, but the famous Henry Ford quote, if I'd asked the customer what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And there's a some of that's true and some of it's not true. But what is true is that you are never going to perfectly hypothesize down to the last detail the perfect product. You have to get some engagement with customers and get them consuming something so that you can collect feedback from the customers. And that feedback is the yellow brick road to maturing and refining the product enough so that it fits the need. And then you have something that's high quality that you can confidently sell en masse. If you skip that part, then you're going to get in trouble, because if you sell something en masse that is not of a adequate level of quality, then you just end up with a bunch of ticked off customers, and that's not good for business.
Never. Uh, I often hear you drone on and on about how much you love lean product testing. For those of us who are not familiar, would you mind give us an overview of the lean product testing?
I'll be happy to drone or pontificate, as some of my colleagues sometimes say I'm wont to do. So, lean product testing is actually, I'm already alluding to a bunch of the stuff that it's about. Lean product testing is about a few main things. It's about getting an idea out to market quickly, as quickly as possible. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's about getting it out there with the minimum levels of investment. So that's where the lean comes from, right? Like a lean is sort of the most efficient um, technique for getting a product out, so that you can actually get some real meaningful customer feedback on it. But the most important thing associated with lean product testing is that you recognize and you accept and you're comfortable with the idea that I actually don't know what the final version of this product is going to be. I've got to figure that out. And there's no way you can sit in an ivory tower. No amount of research, no amount of thinking, no amount of analysis is going to do that for you. There's only one way that you can do that. You can only figure out what the product really needs to look like by getting feedback from actual customers who are willing to pay for it. So you've got to get something out there. You've got to get it selling. And as we've established, that can be really expensive. So you want to find cheap, fast ways to do that. Collect the feedback, because really at the beginning and early stages, the thing that's actually even more valuable than the revenue is the information that you need to figure out what's actually going to drive meaningful revenue. And you've got to get to that meaningful revenue generation point as quickly as possible. So it's all about efficiency. It's all about learning. And then there's kind of, you'll see different versions of this, but with anything lean, whether it's lean product testing or lean manufacturing or lean whatever, it's usually kind of like this virtuous circle of idea, feedback and learning, and then improvement. So you're always kind of using the feedback to improve the product, and it's not rocket science, but it's easier said than done sometimes. But that, just in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about lean product testing. Is basically not flattering ourselves that we are so smart and so knowledgeable about what our customers want that we try to completely engineer the 100% mature product before we go to market with it. We try to come up with what in lean is another very important concept called the MVP, or the minimum viable product. And what that is right there in the name. But that's basically like what's the most inexpensive, fastest, and most efficient version of the product that I can take out to market in order to collect the thoughts and feedback of my customers. So that's kind of what lean product testing is in a nutshell.
And to kind of help ground this, what do you have some examples, some success stories, some real meat to the bones that you can give for this?
Yeah, sure. So, the Power BI example I mentioned was a good one. Um, we also had some real success in the agile world when agile practices became a big thing. Agile Manifesto was signed in 2001. Around 2006, seven, the training market really started to take off. We piloted and marketed early versions of learning solutions around that movement. Um, and now again, like, it wasn't really the training product that was the end all and be all in and of itself. It was the fact that there was a groundswell, like a grassroots professional movement happening all across the software industry. Software was a notoriously dysfunctional profession. And that's a whole other conversation. But like, there were a lot of problems with it, and a lot of those
What?
problems. Touche, touche. Um, but they've figured out some things. But a lot of the problems associated with software are actually some of the problems that we're kind of highlighting. It was the idea that they were handling software projects in a similar way that you would handle a project to build a bridge or something like that, where you need very detailed blueprints. And if you mess up, somebody makes a mistake and cuts a 50-foot steel I-beam the wrong size, well, you just wasted $50,000, and that's not okay. But with software, that's not the case, right? Like, if somebody makes a mistake in a line of code, it's just the push of a button to correct that line of code, even in the final product. I mean, that's not universally true, obviously, but like,
I've seen some repositories completely deleted that would say otherwise, but
well, that's a different situation. But the point is, you can make changes in software very quickly if you do it right. So you know People were following very predictive, project driven methods for building software, and people hated it. And so the agile movement came along, and so there was this big groundswell there. And then there was a big need for training to kind of get people socialized and enabled on how they did that. That product line for us, which started out with just kind of a basic boot camp for software teams, done at a pilot rate. We probably spent, I don't know, $10,000 to $20,000 marketing that beta. We could see very quickly that the betas were selling. Their classes were filling up. We were getting requests from clients to bring that training in. So then, we just opened up the investment ramp with that, grew that product very quickly, from something that was an initial 2 session pilot in two pilot markets. 6 months later, we were taking that product out to like probably 50 top tier markets, advertising like whatever, 50 sessions every 2 months or something like that. And that was a profitable product, and over time, I think, I mean, I don't know if I had to estimate, probably like maybe over 10 years, that was probably like about $100 million product gross, done initially with lean product testing. DevOps was another one, another example that kind of was something nobody really knew about it in the mainstream, but and this was important. Like, I was getting out of my ivory tower and going to meetups and going to user groups and listening to what teams were talking about, and there was a lot of buzz around. There was a lot of excitement, and so you could tell there was something there. And so we tested that, and we tested that very cheaply, and that became another multi-million-dollar training product. And I've got a bunch of those stories. I would also say that probably usually we would say you've got to fail on at least like nine to 15 product ideas to find the one that actually is going to be worth it. So you've got to offset the cost of those 9 failures. So you've got to make enough money on the one that works to offset the cost. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about the template that we use to do that if you want.
I mean, absolutely. I'm sure after hearing that, all of our listeners are foaming at the mouth, running to their computer, setting up dozens of potential test ideas. For those listeners who are eager to get off the ground and find success, what are the metrics? What are the KPIs that they should be looking at?
Yeah, I can talk about a few things there. So first off, be my guest, and may the odds ever be in your favor. It's any new product penetration is not an easy thing. I mean, maybe some people get lucky, but it takes a lot of work, right? But if you're talking about attaching some numbers to the process and some KPIs, I can tell you the playbook that I came to use fairly successfully, and it was quite repeatable. And basically, what we came up with was, now, of course, we had the overall infrastructure of a fairly mature training company, or companies, actually multiple companies where we've done this. But um, once we had that infrastructure in place, the basic template for us would be, we knew that we could test a new idea for $1,000. And what we would do is basically, and of course, there's other dependencies here that are not as measurable, such as, how many relationships do you have with really good subject matter experts? The better your network of resources, and the qualified subject matter experts that the more muscle you have at your disposal to test different training ideas. But assuming that you have that in place, and I did, take some time to cultivate that. But we would take $1,000, and then we would take 500 of those dollars, and we would pay the subject matter expert to do two things. So the first was to create the beta description that we could advertise, and then the second thing would be to create a piece of content. So they do a white paper, or a webinar, or a little tutorial or something like that for us, and it's pretty good. We're not asking the subject matter to do too much work, but they were usually down for that. I mean, they're still, if they're a good subject matter expert, they're still making like $100 an hour or something like that to do that work. And so you have a product description there for the training program, and then you've got a piece of content, and then you take the remaining $500 in your test budget, and you use that $500 to do marketing to the piece of content. And you've got the content that you can drive traffic to, and then of course you've got the description of the training product also. So you've got two things on your website or your catalog or whatever, that you can use the $500 to do the marketing for. Now, you can't do very much marketing for just $500, right? But that's not what it's about. Like, you're not trying to do huge amounts of marketing. You're just trying to collect information, and the information that you're looking for is anybody interested? Like, that's really all you're trying to do. And so, for $500, because it's a fundamentally new product, so you're not competing in with PPC or with your digital marketing. You're not competing with a bunch of other people who also have a similar product. Obviously, new product has to be kind of unique, kind of differentiated. But you can do a little bit of digital advertising for that much money, at least enough to see, is it triggered by any keyword phrases or any searches? Does it get any traffic? And so that's the first KPI early in the product testing cycle that you look at, right? Is just clicks, entrances. Did somebody click on my ad? Did somebody search for my subject matter and visit my website? And you can keep track of those. And we had basically like a prioritized list of these indicators, and they would go from sort of the smallest, least important, to the biggest and most important, right? And so the first one would just be like a click, a website visitor. Did they come, and did they consume my content that's related to this training product? The next one might be a little bit more high quality, like somebody who attends a web seminar or something like that. And then you go on down the line until finally you're getting to things like actual sales leads or actual training requests. Like that was always a very important threshold that we would get to, was when we actually got to the point of a customer calling and requesting a delivery of the training. And then finally, as with all KPIs, at some point you have to chart a course to the metric that matters the most, which is revenue. And so we had revenue frameworks, and basically, we had to make sure that within like a year or an 18-month time frame, we could achieve a run rate where we were making like 35-40% profit margins in order for it to be worth it. So those are a few numbers there, but I'm not saying that's the only or even the best way to test new training products, but you could get the job done for that much. So if I'm testing 15 products in a year, then I've got, that's 15K of test budget. And if I can find $1 million training product for that much, there's obviously costs associated with scaling and delivering the product, but that's a pretty good ROI.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the name of the game, ROI.
Yeah.
What's the quote? The master has failed more times than you've even tried. but
That's exactly right.
you
Yeah,
know,
you have to try a lot. That's another important lean concept too, by the way, is just being comfortable trying and failing. And in some ways, like even just like baking failure into your process, so that you're kind of managing the failure and you're using the failure. If a failure, and I mean there's different kinds of failure too, right? Like if you run your business into the ground and you go bankrupt, then that's not really a valuable failure. Or I mean I don't know, maybe it is, it's not for me. But if you're learning some kind of lesson that helps you adjust your course by little failures, and that's another important thing around the lean product testing, and why training is kind of a cool way to do it, because you can improve the product very quickly. You can learn and make adjustments very quickly, without spending a lot of money, and probably without. If you get good at it, you might not even ever make any customers unhappy. They might be really pleased even with the first delivery. It takes some practice to get to that point, but yeah, you've got to fail some. Um, I want to say one other thing about training products. I know we're kind of coming up on our time, but I mentioned that there's some unique qualities to training, and you can use those qualities to leverage to test other types of product. Especially in like the tech space, or any type of skills based space. Certification is another type of product that you could test. There's all kinds of things. Probably not like manufactured widgets necessarily, but anyway, training, if you think about it, is it's it's easier to define with language because it's advertising something very specific. If I am looking for skills on, um, let's say, let's say, uh, Splunk, for instance, right? So let's say I'm an engineer and I'm a reliability engineer, and I want better telemetry on my production environment. So my employer has approved the budget for me to buy and install Splunk so that I can have really high quality telemetry. Well, there's a lot of technical prowess needed to use that. And I know exactly what I'm looking for. So if I'm going on the web and I'm searching for training on Splunk, you can already see how that's very specific, right? Now, compare that with like a more broad consulting topic, where I'm trying to market my M&A, negotiation consulting or something like that. There's a thousand different ways to approach that question. Whereas with a specific tool or specific technology that you're training on, that language is very specific. So it makes it a very good candidate to match up to search terms and to queries. You've got people out there who are looking for that exact thing. And that's the first big thing I always say. The second big thing about it is that training is just kind of it's a low barrier to entry type of product, both for some of the reasons we've discussed, but also because it's like very finite and defined, right? Like, a training class might be, or a training product or a title, it might run from a couple of hours to a couple of days. It's not a big investment. There's a very specific price point that's associated with that. So it's just all about the fact that it's not very difficult to be specific with this stuff. People understand exactly what they're getting. They understand exactly what they're paying. They understand exactly how long it's going to take. Like that's just not true of early market testing products all the time, but it is with training. And then the other thing is like training also has adjacencies. So like in the case of the Agile movement that I mentioned, or the DevOps movement, or in the case of Power BI, like the real business drivers there are not the training product. It's something else. So if you're trying to do some market testing, again, I'm not saying that you'll be able to do it all the time, or maybe not even most of the time, but it's worth thinking about. Not everybody can test a product for $1,000, but you can test a training product for $1,000. So if there's a relevancy there to something else that you're trying to gauge interest in, just offering training or workshops or some type of skills solution, that could be a good tool in your belt to think about when you're trying to do market testing.
always love adding more tools to the belt.
Tool belt.
Wow, tools to the tool belt. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's
Um,
a little redundant.
well, aren't most things you say, and
I
most
do
things
repeat.
I
I
say.
do. I do repeat myself a lot. Yeah.
I'll ask the AI how many times the word training was used in this video, and then
Yeah. Do a
deduce the
word cloud. Let's
percentage.
see. Podcast episode goes from 43 minutes to 19 minutes if you just delete the word training. But then it wouldn't be the Enterprise Learning Pod,
No, it
would it?
would not be the Enterprise Learning Podcast.
All right, my dude. Anything
Yeah.
else you want to talk about?
Just a fun observation that Agile, you were talking about how Agile was the new hotness that y'all got in on. That came out before I was born. So I wonder how many of the products that you're talking about are older than me, old man. I'm
Yeah,
born
well,
into a world that was already scrumming it up, apparently.
I will tell you this, as you might predict, just the very notion of software agility and Scrum and things like that are a hot topic in the commoditization conversation these days. Yeah, it's there's a whole, you can really get flamed on LinkedIn by wading into the agile is dead conversation. And yet people continue to buy CSM training, so that's kind of interesting. I mean, the market is smarter than you are. That's the other thing I would say. And I've got to give credit to our mutual friend David Manica for indoctrinating me with that idea. Let the market decide, he would always say. I've heard him say that 100 times. Let the market decide.
You know, that reminds me of the old adage, the customer is always right. Because nobody ever says the full thing. The customer is right in matters of taste. So, you know, letting the market decide maybe is not because the market is smarter than you are, but because you have no ability to predict it and that it knows best, whether or not best it's the smartest.
The behavior of the market has nothing to do with it being smart. I will tell you that right now. The market does stuff for all kinds of weird and crazy reasons, which is all the more reason to defer to the information you collect from the market, right? Because it can be a very illogical beast.
Indeed. Indeed. All right. Anything else to talk about?
Yeah, I think we've talked enough. I
Good. That's
appreciate
a
you
good
doing this with me.
45. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's fun being in the slightly hotter seat than the silent producer.
It is fun. Yeah, no, you do a good job. We should do more of these. Let's just like we should bang these out. I've got kind of a list of things that we
Yeah.
can
I also
talk about.
would love at some point to talk about Tip Genius in one of these because I feel like I have at least some things to offer in that
Let's
space.
do that next.
Absolutely. All right, folks. I think this is going to call it for this week's episode of the Enterprise Learning. Oh, there goes it.